My name is John H., and I'm an alcoholic. I'm also a drug addict and a compulsive gambler. In this Code Blue Big Book Study in Action seminar, we're going to go through the recovery section of the Big Book line by line, and we're going to do the action that our book tells us we must do to recover from the seemingly hopeless condition of mind and body. This is based on the Canadian method used by the Golden Slippers, but I also borrow a lot of information from the Joe and Charlie Big Book Weekend tapes, as I feel their interpretation carries so much depth and weight. Sometimes I use their material verbatim, so don't get angry at me. Sometimes they can say things a lot better than me. This action and study is designed so that you can follow along in a 4th edition Big Book. Have your pen and highlighter ready. I don't claim to be any kind of big book guru or top 10 spiritualist. I'm just a simple drunk who was almost dead from the disease when a group of my heroes, some recovered alcoholics, took me through the book 5 years ago and saved my life. There's also some paperwork that you can download. Hopefully I'll get that online as well. Some from Joe and Charlie and some from the Golden Slippers. Please forgive any mistakes, errors, or misquotes you may detect. I'm sure there are many, for once again, I'm just a simple drunk trying to help other folks as I was helped myself. Thanks for listening. I'm John. I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. During the 1950s, a man by the name of Max C., now deceased, started a group in Winnipeg, Manitoba called the Golden Slippers. The group was a back to the basics of the big book kind of group, especially for those people who could not stay sober for any length of time. The group took a bunch of chronic slippers and walked them through the steps, taking the action exactly as laid out by the first 100 men and women who wrote the basic textbook Alcoholics Anonymous. This is not your typical thanks for sharing kind of AA meeting, nor is it like any seminar. Participants are asked to do all 12 steps as laid out in our basic textbook. One or more of the people who have done this work before will be guides to lead you through the instructions in our basic textbook, using a dictionary published at about the same time as the book Alcoholics Anonymous to help us better understand the directions as they were written by the first 100 men and women. We ask every participant to commit to the entire process. Though we read and study the AA Big Book, this group is not limited to members of AA. We who have participated in these groups before have come to understand that these sessions make us much better sponsors. We can now lead people through the steps exactly as given to us by those who have gone before, unfettered and unchanged. In addition to being a boot camp for sponsors, we also feel this is especially valuable to those who have been through some sort of treatment or rehab and have been in effect left off at step 3 or step 5. Recovery requires that we do all 12 steps. We recover in AA by taking the steps, and if we do not take the action as described in our basic textbook, we might not recover. These study and action sessions will guide you through the steps precisely as the first 100 men and women laid them down. These are back to the basic sessions, accepting the simple kit of spiritual tools that's been laid at our feet. Let's open with a set-aside prayer. God, please let me set aside everything I think I know about sobriety, life, and you, so that I may be open to a new experience. Peace. All right, guys, welcome. Thank everybody for coming. Sorry about last week, but I was up in the Boundary Waters. I was telling a few people that it was cold and it rained the whole time. A bear ripped our camp apart. My canoe got a big hole in it, and we had many other mishaps, and I just had a wonderful time. Today, if I would have, 5 years ago, I would have just complained and complained and complained. But today, I look at the positives, and it was really just a wonderful experience overall. So, very happy that I went up there. What we're going to do today, guys, and I, with everything, getting back from up north and going back into the chaos that is work, I didn't have the usual time to prepare, so bear with me today. I'll be shuffling my notes around here and there, but we've got a lot of important stuff to talk about today, and we are going to immediately dive right in. Did everybody get the paperwork, by the way? The 4-step stuff that I have up here, I had up there 2 weeks ago. The new one is the one on the basic instincts of life. By the way, anybody that does not have a 12 and 12, please get a 12 and 12, 12 steps and 12 traditions. And I want you guys to read, like if you have time, read the 4th step in the 12 and 12. There's a lot of information about these basic instincts on life that I think is critical that we need to know when we do our 4th step. So, and if you don't have a 12 and 12. It's just it's one of those things that you should get. The 12 and 12 is an expansion on the steps. Now, in the 12 and 12, there are no instructions on how to work the steps, right? They are just essays that talk more about them so you can understand them a little bit better, and they'll help you to work the steps and also to learn about their traditions. But the only instructions on how to work the steps are in the book that we're going through here in this Code Blue, and that's the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. So, all right, we are at How It Works. Okay, so that is page 58. All right, yep, 58. And so what, guys, what have we done up to this time? Well, we look, of course, we did the history of the book a little bit, but we did the doctor's opinion. The doctor's opinion tells us what the problem is. Okay, then we read chapter 1. Chapter 1 is Bill's story. That gives us alcoholics an example of somebody who has the problem, right, and how he recovered. Chapter 2, there is a solution, shows us what the answer is, what the solution. The problem being powerlessness, the solution being power, right? And there's two powers. They talk about the power of the fellowship, right, which supports us, but then the power of the vital spiritual experience, which changes us, right, and takes away our obsession and helps us to live a much better life. Chapter 3, that shows us what's going to happen to us alcoholics if we don't find that power. Remember, it talked about the 4 people and how they believed a lie and went back to drinking. So if we don't find that power and have that vital spiritual experience, the book tells us that insanity is going to return. We're going to look for a way to feel better again, and we're going to pick up that drink. And if you're anything like me, you know, for me to take a drink is to die, or certainly die well before my time. Now, chapter 4 is going to show us a power that we can begin to live with. It doesn't tell us how to believe, but it explains a power that we can hopefully make a decision about, right? So now, you know, when you try to get into the mind of Bill, and you think that, hey, I've given them all the information that they need to see the problem, to see the solution, and accept the idea of that solution, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell them the action necessary, the practical program of action that we implement to find that solution, which basically is finding a higher power. So the way I interpret this, these are instructions on how to find a higher power, and you know, heck, the book talks about God, so I'm just gonna come out and say that it's instructions on how to find a God of our own understanding. So. We are on page 58. Now everybody get their highlighter and their pen, because we got kind of a lot of stuff we're going to be writing. So first of all, at the top of the page, and I still do this to this day, let's write dedicate 1 day a week to work with sponsees, right? And sometimes it's more than that. But you know, I have, you know, and it's usually Sunday mornings is when I meet with people. But if necessary, I do it whenever I need to. But dedicate 1 day a week to work with sponsees. Because again, guys, the whole idea is we go through this book, we do the actions, we have the vital spiritual experience, we recover, right? And then we go out and help other sick and dying alcoholics. And that's how we stay refreshed, that's how we stay reborn in our mind, how we stay sober, and how we keep living a good life. And again, remember, this book that we're reading, even though Bill Wilson is the primary author, it's written by 100 people. So it's essentially the testimony of the first 100 people who recovered from the seemingly hopeless condition of body and mind. So we're going to start. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Underline followed our path, and then just draw a little line up to the top and write the 12 steps. Right? The 12 steps, that's the path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot, underline cannot, or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Okay? So we're going to write a couple things off to the left. We can write one type of cannot. You can write in prison. Right? When this book came out, there were not meetings in prison. So back when it was written, people who were in prison were considered a cannot because they could not get access to the book or to meetings, right? completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves, circle the word honest, right? And then we're also going to write off to the left, if you can't be honest, you are also a cannot. So if you can't be honest, you are a cannot. And, I didn't, be honest with myself. Of course, how can I lie to myself? And I didn't understand it. But boy, I when you work these steps, at least for me, I saw how I was not only conning everybody else in my life, but I was also conning myself into thinking that I was, a good person doing good things out there when I really wasn't. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living, underline, which demands rigorous honesty. Right? And circle the word honest again. That's the second time it's come up. Their chances are less than average. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders. Next to mental disorders, we can write depression and schizophrenia. I could guess how to spell that, but I'd be wrong. But you can write depression and schizophrenia. But many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. And again, circle honest again. That's the third time they've used that word, right? And remember, let's see, I guess it's in the next one. So we're going to highlight the next two lines. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. Now, above what happened, write solution. Write the solution. Somewhere next to that, off to the left, you can write when you speak, next to those two lines that we highlighted. That's kind of the format that people use when they speak. It's also pretty much the format when you read the stories in the back of the book. Okay? The other thing, too, I want you to write is give message of hope. Right? That's our job. We come in here, and you know what? My life is so much better, even on days when things aren't going very good. And I don't want to come into these meetings and be a gloomy Gus and complain. I want to give a message of hope. And by God, when I do that, no matter how I'm feeling, I always feel better when I pass on a message of hope to people who really need it. If you have decided you want what we have, okay, again, underline, and are willing to go to any length to get it, just that little phrase there, then you are ready to take certain steps. Okay? So now, after certain steps, write ask sponsee. Right? Because again, I'll never forget when that first guy, asked me to sponsor him. I wasn't even done with these darn steps yet. My sponsor made me raise my hand. I said, what the hell, how am I going to do this? And he said, you're going to take them through the book. You're going to have them write what we did, and you're going to have them do exactly the actions that you and I did together. And that's how you're going to sponsor them. And that's why he has all these little things in here that as we're going through. So when we get to here, we've read a lot, right? We've got the 4 words. We're on page 58. We're going to say, are you willing to go to any length to get this thing? Right? Now, I certainly, I hope and I pray that they're going to say, yes, I am. If they say, well, no, not really, I'm not willing to do anything, then you got to reevaluate, whether they're wasting their time and you're wasting your time. So, by the time I've gotten to this point, thank goodness, in my limited experience, I've never had anybody say, no, I ain't going to go to any length. Haven't had that yet. At some of these, we balked. Okay, highlight this next little sentence. We thought we could find an easier, softer way. Okay, next to that line, write must get sponsor. Right? I did not want. I went through this code blue and I figured I could work these steps without getting a sponsor. I did not want anybody that I had to be accountable to, right? That could help me see what I couldn't see. I did not want that. But finally, when we got up to the 5th step is when they assigned me one, right? They said, you've got to have one. And I said, I think you're right. But we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Okay, highlight just to the end of the paragraph. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Right? So remember, we talked about some of those old ideas and those old prejudices last week when we read We Agnostics, right? Our old ideas. Remember that we deal with alcohol. Cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. But there is one, circle one, right, that's capitalized, who has all power. That one, circle one, is God. And again, circle God. And then highlight, may you find him now. Okay? And then right after, may you find him now, write the word presently / immediately. That means right now. It doesn't mean tomorrow. It doesn't mean next week. It means right now. Right? And they're going to do a little bit of repeating here, so we're going to circle this next 5 words. Half measures availed us nothing. Right? They availed us nothing. I know for 20 years I would come in and out of these rooms and I would just dip my toe in the water and nothing ever worked until I jumped into this all the way and I did everything that I was told to do. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. So after abandon, write prayer without reserve / total surrender. Total surrender. Now, as I read the steps, these steps are talked about all over this book, but I'm going to give you the principle of each step. We're going to write it next to it. And I'm also going to give you the main page where you can find that step. Even though, we saw when we did Bill's story and even all the forewords and chapters 2, 3, and 4, we saw step 1 all over the place. But there is one place where we see it more than others. So I'm going to give you the page number and the principle. You can kind of write that at the end of the step. So here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. Now I'm also going to read, when I'm done with this, I'm going to read the original how it works as Bill wrote it, and we're going to see some interesting differences. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Honesty. Gosh, I can't read. Page 30. Honesty, page 30. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 47, hope. Hope, principle. Page 47. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Circle God as we understood him, because that's anytime they put things in italics, it's very important. And that's going to be page 63, faith. Faith. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 64, courage. Page 64, courage. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 75, 75, integrity. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Willingness, 76. Willingness, page 76. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. Page 76, humility. 76, humility. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 76, brotherly love. 76, brotherly love. Or love. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. You guessed it, page 76. Forgiveness / justice. Forgiveness / justice. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Page 84, discipline. Discipline. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him. Again, underline God as we understood him. Praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. We're going to write page 85. We're going to write spiritual awareness. And then we're going to write something at the bottom of the page. Right? And we're gonna read a little bit more about this when I read the original, how Bill wrote it. Steps are not suggested. Done by first 100, we must do. Right? And this is my shorthand. I don't even know exactly what they said, but steps are not suggested, right? Because it's going to tell us up to here. It's saying must, must, must. Steps are not suggested. Done by first 100, we must do. Right? And I mean, I think they said that if we want what they got, we're going to have to do these things just like they did. Steps are not suggested, we must do. Right? Done by first 100. They did them. These are the actions that the first 100 people took. Right? They decided to write this book. It was unheard of. When they had a first meeting, they found that there were 40 people that had been getting some long-term sobriety. And Bill had the longest at 3 years. And that's why they wanted him to be the primary author. This was unheard of for people to get that kind of sobriety back in the day because they didn't have anything. They would get out of these detox centers or these asylums, and the real alcoholics would immediately go out there and relapse. So they were done by the first 100. We must do. 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics, underline, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And double underline the word all. Right? I mean, it took me a couple of years to figure out that I had to practice these things more than 1 hour a day, right, when I came to these meetings. And when I started doing that, my life got a heck of a lot better, right? And that's page 89, service. 89, service.
Hey, John, can you back up to
Yep.
number 6? I didn't catch that.
Number 6, page 76, willingness.
Thank you.
What's the page number for number 1? Is that 30?
Yes, 30. Okay, so many of us exclaimed, "What an order! I can't go through with it." Okay? Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. Circle these principles, right? And somewhere in there, write the steps. Right? They're the principles. I mean, they're the steps. They can interchange. Bill doesn't like to use the same words. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing, underline willing, to grow along spiritual lines. Okay? And then we're going to highlight the next 3 lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Okay, so again, the principles are the steps, right? Our description of the alcoholic. That's the doctor's opinion. Above that, you can write doctor's opinion. The chapter to the agnostic and our personal adventures before and after, right? Those are the stories. Make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. Highlight that. So after that, write, I will screw it up. I will screw it up. B, highlight A, B, C. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. No God, you are in trouble. You can write, no God, you are in trouble. And C, that God could and would if he were sought. Okay, so after C, write action. Right underneath that one. Because seeking is an action. Right? So you can write, off to the left, you can write program in a nutshell. Okay? And then under program in a nutshell, write, we are at 82 pages. Okay, and I'm counting the forewords, right? So
The same one, number.
Next to ABC, off to the left, you can write program in a nutshell.
After C.
Yep. And then next to A, B, and C. And then you can write right near C, or right around C, write, we are at 82 pages.
Before that, though.
Oh, action. Under C, you write action. Yep. Because God could and would if he were sought, right? If I'm not going to go out and seek God by doing what my sponsor tells me and by following the actions of the book, by golly, I don't think I'm going to have much success. So that's going to take action. Basically, the A is pretty much step one, right? B is kind of part of the first part of step two, right? And C, is kind of the last part of step two, and then all the way through 11, right? So that's kind of 2.5 through 11 is what C is. And again, remember, at the C, we're at 82 pages, right? So everybody, I've had people say, hey, welcome to AA. Go to How It Works on page, can't even read that, on 58. Read it and do what it says and you'll be fine. Well, no, that's not going to happen because we have gone through 82 pages on steps 1 and 2 because the very next line says, being convinced we were at step 3. Highlight that. So that's why that 82 pages is very important. I have to know I really have to know about this disease of alcoholism, and I have to get some new ideas about God before I can make a decision. So we've spent 82 pages, and we're not even at step 3 right now. So anybody who says, go to page 58 and do what it says, I think that they're selling people short. There's just too much stuff that we need to know. And people say, well, how do we work steps 1 and 2? And the answer to that is you pretty much you can't work steps 1 and 2, right? Steps 1 and 2 are essentially conclusions of the mind, right? We have to come to the conclusion on step 1, and we have to come to the conclusion on step 2. Now, the action starts in step 3 when we make that decision to try things a different way. So I'm going to stop at being convinced, okay? And now remember, we talked about, Bill, I talked about chapter 4. So it brings us to how it works. So just a little bit about the history of how it works, right? Bill was writing this book, and every time he wrote some pages or whatnot, he would send them to the groups in Akron and give some to the group in New York. And then later, towards the end, there was also a group in Cleveland that would see some of the work, right? So they insisted on seeing what he wrote. And they forced Bill to make changes because, again, they said, Bill, this is you're to be the author, but this is our book. It's not your book, right? So we all are going to agree before we send this thing to the publisher, what we write down. And Bill began to see that the people in Akron, who were headed by Dr. Bob, the other founder, they wanted a book about God. They didn't have a problem with religion. They didn't even have a problem with the Bible. They said, Bill, you put God in there. You put Bible references. You do all you want. We like that stuff, Bill. And then he had the people in New York City, right? The people in New York City, they wanted a book dealing with the mind itself. And they wanted very little spirituality and no religion whatsoever. And funny enough, they were led by a guy called Jimmy the Atheist. His name was Jimmy Burwell, right? And they would say, Bill, you get that God stuff out of the book. Get it out of there. So, Bill is thinking he had a really hard time when he got to How It Works because Bill is thinking, how in God's green earth am I going to satisfy everybody? We've got Protestants, we've got Catholics, we've got a smattering of Jews and a sprinkling of Muslims. How in the world am I going to write instructions on how to, and atheists? I mean, how am I going to write instructions on how to find a higher power when I've got all these people? So he was having real difficulty when he got to How It Works, right? So as the story goes, this is the way Bill told it. He was in his bed and he had his pencil out and his paper and he couldn't come up with anything. He'd been trying for days. He set the paper and pencil down and he just couldn't come up with anything. Closed his eyes. He prayed and he meditated for 20, 30 minutes. Picked up the pencil and the pad of paper and he started writing, and Bill said that the pencil literally ran across the page by itself, right? Now when Bill was done, he numbered the steps, and there were 12 steps. Now, funny enough, this program was based on the Oxford group, so yesterday before he wrote it, there were only 6 steps. Right? And I'm going to give you don't have to write this, but there's 2 little versions of 6 steps. One was 1, complete deflation, 2, dependence and guidance from a higher power, 3, moral inventory, 4, confession, 5, restitution, 6, continued work with other alcoholics. So that's on page 263 if you want to make a note. I think it's in one of the stories in the 4th edition. Another kind of scribbling of the first 6 steps were admitted hopeless, got honest with self, got honest with another, made amends, help others without demands, prayer to God as you understand Him. So there were only 6 steps, and all of a sudden, Bill's got 12, right? So can you imagine if you guys showed up tonight and said, hey, guess what? We're going to be working 24 steps in this program, right? You're like, what? 24 steps. So what happened then, Bill was real excited, and he said, guys, this is amazing. You will not believe what I came up with here. And he showed the other members of the fellowship what he wrote, and that's when all kinds of problems started. Here, I guess at this point, I'm going to read the original how it works. And I'll do it quickly, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my inflection on the words that have been changed, right? So I'm going to read this quickly again, what I just wrote. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our directions. Okay, those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to the simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a way of life which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to follow directions. And some of these you may balk. You may think you can find an easier, softer way, but we doubt if you can. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that you are dealing with alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful. Without help, it is too much for you. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. You must find Him now. Half measures will avail you nothing. You stand at the turning point. Throw yourself under His protection and care with complete abandon. Now we think you can take it, right? Here are the steps we took which are suggested as your program of recovery, right? So he's saying, you, ought, must. Must instead of ought. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care and direction of God as we understood Him, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, admitted to God, to ourselves, and other human being the exact nature of our wrongs. We're entirely willing that God remove all these defects of character, humbly on our knees asked Him to remove our shortcomings, holding nothing back, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make complete amends to them all, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except to when to do so would injure them or others, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our contact with God. And they took out conscience, and they took out as we understood Him. Our contact with God, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Having had a spiritual experience, remember He changed it to awakening. Having had a spiritual experience as the result of this course of action, we tried to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Remember, they got this from the Oxford group, and back when Bill and the first people were in these Oxford group meetings, they were known as the drunk squad of the Oxford group, right? So he changed these. They made him change these things. Now you may exclaim, right? You may exclaim, what an order, I can't go through with it. Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow on spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, okay, that's the doctor's opinion, Bill's story, some chapters 2 and 3. The chapter to the agnostic, chapter 4. And our personal adventures before and after, that's Bill's story and those in the back of the book, have been designed to sell you 3 pertinent ideas, right? I'm a salesman, and I'm telling you, I understand what Bill is all the time, because I find myself trying to sell this program to people as best I can, because I know that if they don't do it, they're probably going to end up dead. It's certainly a good possibility, right? To sell you 3 pertinent ideas that you are alcoholic and cannot manage your own life, right? Step 1, that probably no human power can relieve your alcoholism. Step 2, that God can and will, right? The rest of step 2. If you are not convinced on these vital issues, you ought to reread the book to this point or else throw it away. Right? That's what Bill's. So, obviously we can see that Bill, one thing is abundantly clear. Bill intended these as a set of directions, right? That he wanted you to guys, he wanted all of us to follow the instructions, the directions rather. So let's see where I am here. So now when they looked at it, they said, Bill, this is ridiculous. You can't tell alcoholics what to do. You can't say you must, right? And they were 6 steps yesterday. Now there's 12. What in the hell are you doing? So things got really ugly, and it almost destroyed the book project and the little fellowship as a whole, right? Again, they just said, you can't give directions to alcoholics. You got to give suggestions. You can't say you must. We got to soften it down a little bit. And Bill is like, guys, I'm not going to change a damn thing. And they said, Bill, remember, this is our book. It's not your book. And Bill is like, hey, look, fellas, I prayed about this, and it came to me after I prayed about it. So this came directly from God, right? And they said, we don't care who it came from. You're not putting it in our book, right? So again, it almost destroyed the book project and the fellowship, the little fellowship, over how it works. So Bill realized that he had to compromise. He had to compromise or things were going to get out of hand. There was a non-alcoholic psychiatrist around at the day, and he said, look here, Bill, and everybody, he said, let's change directions to suggestions, and let's change you to we, and let's change must to ought. And Bill said, doggone it, guys, because he wanted this thing to continue, so he agreed that he would make those changes, and he said, I'm going to make a deal with you guys. If you want me to do that, I'll do it, but you've got to give me the authority to finish this recovery section of the book. I want the final authority on what I put in there, and the other guys were like, well, we don't want to do that. We don't know what you're going to do. And Bill said, well, then I'm not going to finish the book. And they said, okay, you change this and you can finish it. And funny enough, what Bill did, 2 pages later, he put directions and musts right back in the book. So what's funny, when you read this book, we've had directions and we've had must, and then they jerked it out. They made them jerk it out for how it works, and then 2 pages later, it's right back in there. So it's a little confusing the way it changed, but now that we understand what happened, it makes a little bit more sense of what's going on with it. So let's see where I'm going to now. Okay, so we're going to go back to page 60. So again, we're at being convinced, right? Now again, draw a little arrow down wherever you have room and write, if not convinced, go back and reread. Okay, so this is not only for you guys, but this is for your sponsees. If not convinced, and what we're convinced about are steps 1 and 2, right? Those are conclusions of the mind, right? We're powerless, our lives are unmanageable, right? And they came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So, if not convinced, go back and reread. Being convinced, we were at step 3, right? And again, they put italics there because everything up to this point is to get us to step 3, and we're not even quite there yet. Which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood Him.
I'm sorry, Tom.
Yep.
Do you mean reread start at the very beginning of the book?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
If not convinced, go back and reread. You bet. And I mean, you can start with a doctor's opinion, or you could go back to the 4 words that we read, but I'd say go back and start at the doctor's opinion and reread it. You know, because if you're not convinced that you're powerless over alcohol and that you're an alcoholic, right? And if you're not convinced that you're going to need the help of a higher power to save your life, then you're probably not going to be willing to make a decision, right? It can be even as simple as going through with the rest of the steps. People that have a big problem with step 3, I just say, well, how about just considering it a decision to go through with the rest of the steps and see what happens, right? So, just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? Highlight that little sentence, right? And then we're going to write step 3 starts here. Right? Obviously, that's kind of obvious, but write it. Step 3 starts here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to highlight the next 4 lines. The first requirement, right? That means it's necessary. The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Let's see here. I'll go a little further here. So highlight those lines. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he is more likely to have varied traits. Okay. So I'm thinking to myself, I don't really know what that means, right, as I read this book. And that's why I want all you guys, again, I want you to read about the basic instincts of life, which you're going to find in the first, I would say read the whole thing on step 4 in the 12 and 12. But again, right, when we've got step 3, and it talks about turning our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood Him, some people have a big problem with that, and I say, well, one way that I was taught, because I didn't come up with any of this stuff, this is all stuff that I was taught or somebody showed me. If you can look at your will as your thinking, so your will is your thinking, and your life is your actions, right? So my will and my life, all I'm going to do is I'm going to ask God, and I ask God every morning, please direct my thinking and please direct my actions, because, up until I started working these steps, I made one heck of a mess out of everything, and if I can have something greater than myself that's directing me, that has, my welfare and the welfare of others in mind, it's going to come out a lot better. So basically, I'm just going to talk briefly about these basic instincts of life. And I mean, it took me a long time to understand this, but when you work these steps, and a lot of people say that when we get to 10 and 11, they're reworking steps 4 through 9 over and over. Whenever I get angry, whenever I have fear, whenever I cause harm to somebody, I now can look at it, and the columns we're going to run when we do step 4, I can see exactly why I'm doing these things, because one of my basic instincts of life was threatened, right? So this is that little sheet that you've got, right? So the first one, the basic instincts. All humans they're born with these basic instincts of life. So all 3 of these basic instincts are God-given, and they're absolutely necessary for the survival of the human race. Therefore, these basic instincts are good, right? So we've got the social instinct, which is to be liked, accepted, respected by others, right? We come together in groups. We need these desires to prevent a dog-eat-dog anarchy, right? So it's, companionship to belong, or it's prestige to be the leader of, and that involves self-esteem, what we think of ourselves high or low, and many times that's based on what others think of us, right? Or what we think others think of us, right? And that also involves pride. Now, pride, right, used to be a really good thing, right? But pride, an excessive and unjustified opinion of oneself, right? Either positive or negative. So either you think you're really lousy, which is wrong, or you think you're the absolute best in the world. Either way, it's not the truth, right? So that's the social instinct. So this can create within humans an insatiable desire for more and more power, more and more recognition. And what happens is if we're not getting it fast enough, we start to take shortcuts, right? I want to be the guy that's respected. I want to move ahead. So I'm not getting it by being honest and doing hard work. So my goodness, if I lie, I con, I manipulate, I step on the toes of other people, right? I can get it faster, right? But when we do that, we create pain and suffering for others, and then they in turn create pain and suffering for us, right? So, I mean, like if you want to get ahead at work and you're there, you're bad-mouthing your boss, you're making stuff up, you're doing stuff that's not true so you can get ahead, that's going to come back and bite you. So again, the social instinct is absolutely necessary, but I think what they're telling us is that sometimes in alcoholics and drug addicts, and that we take these things to a little bit of an extreme, right? And when we take these things to an extreme, our self-will becomes so great that we cannot have a successful life because we're always in collision with people, places, and things.